Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Is there a shift in consciousness going on amidst the human race? What does shift of consciousness mean anyway? Are even the greatest of human minds ready for such a shift?
Hello there, and welcome to the 323rd. Sorry, all the twos and threes got me mixed up.
Edition of the thousands.
Yeah, I know. Behind that's a long way away, Father. So, edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Ben, and those mind-bending questions came from my co-host and partner in the paranormal, my dad. But before we welcome our guest, it's time for our weekly paranormal contest. So last week's question was, who used the term exceptional human experience to define the paranormal?
Well, Nicole Preston from Charlotte, North Carolina got the correct answer, the parapsychologist Dr. Rhea White. Nicole added a note, quote, "Hey, Paul, I remembered that from your book Turning Home, where you disagreed with Dr. White," unquote. Well, I did disagree with Dr. White. Paranormal is not exceptional at all. The paranormal is entirely normal.
Oh, wordplay there. So this week's question is, in what country is the haunted Dream Beach located? So we get that right, and we win a copy of Footsteps in the Attic by my dad.
Now to our guest. Our good friend Larry Lowe is a veteran aerospace journalist, pilot, software engineer, television presenter, and radio guest with 3 decades of personal research into the UFO and related phenomena. He lives in the vicinity of Phoenix, Arizona, where those famous Phoenix lights occur. He served on the board of directors of MUFON Los Angeles, MUFON being the Mutual UFO Network, and hosted a monthly cable television interview program. He has appeared on numerous television episodes discussing the UFO phenomenon, most recently a National Geographic Channel investigation into the famous Phoenix lights we just mentioned. Larry's interests range from nanotechnology and the technological singularity to shamanic use of entheogens, I always have to look twice at that, and the nature of consciousness, which is our subject this evening. Since 2009, he has served as the Phoenix UFO Examiner for Examiner.com. In his most recent role as the National Social Reality Examiner at Examiner.com, Larry has reported on Russian geophysicist Elchin Khalilov's theory that increased solar activity associated with a coming solar maximum may be responsible for the strange earth sounds people have been reporting and that we discussed on our CBS show last week. As a matter of fact, Larry did appear with Linda Moulton Howe, investigative journalist, on that show on February 20th. And if you'd like to listen to the podcast of that, check BehindTheParanormal.com or iTunes for our show number 320. Although iTunes doesn't list the show numbers. So anyway, go to Behind the Paranormal. Larry's website, www.examiner.com/UFO in Phoenix with dashes. Maybe he'll give us a simpler. Larry-Lowe. All right, well, we'll have Larry explain about that website later.
Okay, so Larry Lowe, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal.
Uh-oh.
All right, well...
Okay, well, all right, well, let's try and get him back. Sorry here. We had a few... well, anyway, last night we had an interesting show on CBS. We had a panel of UFO abductees. And we had the great Travis Walton, who unfortunately he was unable to make it actually, but we had Whitley Strieber, who was the author of the book Communion and the movie Communion too, which came out I believe in the 1990s and had to do with his spectacular UFO abduction experiences from 1985 and beyond. And we also had Tom Reed, who has been on this show as well. We did 2 shows with him on his family abduction experience. Now, Ben and I are not sure what to make of the actual abduction experience, sort of reserve judgment on that. There are all sorts of explanations, but people whom we respect do seem to be having these experiences. Larry, are you with us? Oh, apparently the aliens are interfering again. Okay. Okay, Larry, are you with us? Oh, okay. I'm having a little trouble on the board here, but anyway, we'll continue this our discussion until we can get Larry here. Larry is particularly interested in the work of Edgar Mitchell, who was one of the Apollo 14 astronauts. I believe he was the 6th man to walk on the moon. And on the way back from the moon, and Larry will get into this once we get him here, experience that he had was quite remarkable as far as a spiritual awakening is concerned. One can only imagine, maybe one cannot imagine, going into space, let alone walking on another planet, as it were. Larry, are you with us?
Indeed I am.
Oh, very good. Good. Okay. Thank you. Glad to have you with us back again. I'll stop ad-libbing here and we'll get to our questions. Ben, take it away.
Okay, so when you say consciousness, what do you mean?
Well, that was just a very simple question. I can just toss out a quick answer to that one.
There you go.
See?
I'm not too sure that anybody has a good definition of consciousness, but it's Edgar would talk about the sense of what we... I can't give you his answer as well as he could, but it's in essence, it's who it is that's doing the thinking that's inside who we think we are.
Okay. Yeah, we've had him on the show before, but it was all too long ago. We'll have to have him back. Well, when we think of forms of consciousness, and let me just say that Larry is what Ben and I try to be, which is people who get behind what these things mean. People throw terms around such as the paranormal or consciousness or whatever, and there is meaning behind these things that in order to even come close to any sort of understanding that we have to address. So hence the question. I remember one experience I've had. Now Larry too knows many people and has been a great traveler. When I was in Australia, Larry, in '79, and talking with an Aboriginal elder, we had the privilege of speaking with him for about 7 hours. There were forms of consciousness that he pointed out that do not involve physical travel, for example. But he himself, having been a shaman, was very familiar with other parts of the universe that we have not, of course, reached with our own technology. And that seemed to be a form of consciousness that which he said was just as real as physical travel, that sort of thing. So the question might arise as an addendum to the question on what is consciousness, what is real and what is not real. What say you?
Well, I think that one of the things I'm starting to come to a model of, and this is a comment was made by somebody else, is about one talks about one's reality tunnel. And to back up just a bit and try to give you an answer, I think that the term consciousness gets used in a real fast and loose manner in our society. But, so-and-so had a big breakthrough on the Wall Street and it changed his consciousness. And that's really a rather pale use of it. I think there's a richer sense of changing one's consciousness, one's awareness of reality. And that's probably where you're headed. And that example from the Aborigine in Australia parallels a story written by a guy by the name of Fool's Crow, who was a Sioux elder. And he talks about going into his little tiny makeshift hut and doing a kind of a sensory deprivation experiment at a sweat lodge. And his mind, his awareness, his consciousness drifting up out of his body, out of the plane of the earth, all the way, as he put it in the book, to the center of the galaxy to talk with the consciousness and the energies and the spirits there. So a true sense of shift of consciousness is different than just say, I went through a divorce and that changed my consciousness on women.
Yeah, exactly.
Consciousness on women. So in your writing, you single out Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell and his 1971 experience in space and his work on consciousness ever since. So can you tell us about Mitchell and what his work means for the rest of us?
Well, I think you have to really appreciate the unique contribution that Edgar Mitchell made to the Apollo program, because every one of these highly skilled test pilots and military aviators who went up there trained very deeply in a left brain organized consciousness. We're going to go to the moon on the basis of a checklist, a series of steps, a whole bunch of science, a lot of engineering. There's a launch window. There's a time for the orbital injection. Everything has to happen in exactly the right order, and we will get back in one piece. And for the most part, they would all execute that. But every one of the Apollo astronauts that I've ever spoken with, if you get them a little bit in a corner and talk to them, they'll get that sort of wistful look in their eye, and they'll talk about looking at the Earth from 250,000 miles away as one small round thing that you could cover with a dime or your thumb, and realizing that the whole planet is a whole planet. And that realization for all of them was a shift in their consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
But Edgar Mitchell took it one step farther than that. He deliberately put together an experiment on his way back where he tried to go through some process of looking at some cards and saying, this is what I see, the kind of the classic telepathy experiment. And there were some results recorded on the ground. But on the way back, as he tells the story, the capsule was spinning, and he was not in the checklist, and he could just sit and absorb the cosmos spinning outside the window, and he had this fundamental moment. The word epiphany gets used, but I don't think that's adequate. It's more like what some of the Hindus call sumadhi, or something, the goal of meditation. I think he had an expansion of his consciousness, and he realized, among other things, that every atom in the body was at one point forged in the fire of a deep, distant sun long in the past. And why this whole statement is so important is when we begin to think about quantum entanglement, and you have to have your atoms and your elements of the atomic structure in close proximity one another become entangled. And we realize that everything on Earth was at one point all maybe in the same sun or forged in a similar manner. If you go all the way back to the Big Bang, it was all in the same place. Suddenly you realize that our consciousness is entangled, and it's a matter of perception. Can we choose to perceive that entanglement and perceive that reality? And he just then went on to found the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and more recently Quantrek, and has done an enormous amount of very, very careful, methodical thinking about what consciousness and reality really is.
Mm-hmm. Larry, in an article about Mitchell that you wrote only a few weeks ago on Examiner.com, and maybe you could give us is there an easier website address than what I was trying to give?
Actually, you simply go to Examiner.com and search for Phoenix UFO, and it's about the third article down on my list.
Okay.
There's a long URL, but...
Okay. Anyway, in that article, you stated something that really hit home with me. Quote, his, meaning Mitchell's, goal is correcting what he sees as a flaw in man's approach to thinking induced in the 17th century. This mistake placed Western scientific thinking within a box of materialist context. That, in turn, precludes complete understanding of the laws of the universe. From Edgar Mitchell's perspective, the best minds of our civilization are not thinking comprehensively. Until they are, we as a species won't likely get where evolution beckons us, unquote. You know, that I could have worked for a year and not put that as well as you did. I think that's extremely true. I've been running into that very problem in my own work since the very year of Mitchell's flight, 1971. Ben runs into it now.
Oh, yeah.
And we run into it all too often with advanced degree guests on the show. People with PhDs who don't know anything because their consciousness is too limited by exactly what you state. Can you comment on this epistemological problem from your own point of view?
Well, I came up with this term some time back called the box of context. And I realized that when people were talking to me about their point of view, they didn't realize it, but they were sitting inside a certain framework that bounded their ability to have imagination or think or to consider what's conceivable. And Mitchell is correct in analyzing, I think, at the time of the Reformation, at the time of the dawn of the Renaissance, the church said, if you guys are going to discuss all this stuff about physics and whatever and start telling us that the Earth goes around the sun, you can do that, but you've got to leave a bunch of it to us. And that bunch of it turns out to be consciousness. And people who were born and raised and educated in our society, to a certain extent, the more they are educated, the tighter that box of context becomes, and the less likely they are to consider anything far enough outside those limits. They simply write it off. They just look at you like you're not thinking right if you even use that term in a sentence.
Exactly.
And it's very, very difficult to have a conversation with these folks.
It is. Excuse me. And the attempt that many well-intentioned people have made to penetrate the mysteries of the paranormal, or never mind consciousness, has resulted in a mess, frustration, of course, because they attempt to use this materialistic paradigm, which just isn't good enough. And when we've gotten beyond that, people have taken offense. They have us on their own shows, and they have us out to speak, and many of the ordinary people will say, well, that makes sense. That's what I've experienced. But some of the quote unquote experts feel as though they're
being attacked verbally.
That's not our intention, and we're not the only ones who approach it the way we do. But anyway, I'm just saying that we get what you're saying, and it's a problem as far as the advancement of knowledge is concerned, never mind the advancement of human evolution.
Yeah, it extends beyond this, too, because people don't know how to debate anymore. I mean, people don't listen to people. They just wait for their time to speak.
Yeah, and you're wrong. We see it in politics.
Basically.
Yeah. So you mentioned also... I'm sorry, go ahead, Larry.
You're wrong and I'm louder.
Exactly.
Yeah, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. But there's another comment I'm quoting of yours. Quote, the mechanism of perception of the phenomenon is, I think, at the heart of our misunderstanding of reality. So a question might arise, what is perception? Is it the same thing as consciousness? And what is its proper mechanism?
Perception is not consciousness.
Okay.
I think and Edgar is very fond of saying that the kind of perception that he's talking about, the thing that we always talk about kind of loosely as the sixth sense, because it didn't fit in the first five, it maybe really ought to be considered our first sense. Perception is that photons come in your eyes, they hit the rods in the back of the retina, they're changed into electrical signals, they travel up the optic nerve, and they go into this big maze of parallel processing, and they arrive at the visual cortex, and somehow, some way, by some magic, all of those signals that are now sorted out arrive in our awareness as sight of what we're seeing around us. And the same mechanism occurs for touch, taste, smell, all of the fundamental senses we rely upon them, because sight is so incredibly powerful, we think we live behind our eye. Now, the other kind of perception that science never got an opportunity to take a look at is intuition. I think that Edgar would tell you that he's trying to figure out the mathematics of intention. Intention is a transmitter into what he calls the quantum hologram, and intuition is the receiver. And through some process we don't quite have figured out, this field that isn't measurable by normal science it can generate input into our visual cortex, our audio cortex, and give us perception. This is how people can hear clairaudience, they can have clairvoyance, they can do telepathy. The fundamental deal is a very simple situation where you're talking to somebody and you formulate a thought and you've got an attitude and you're not articulating it, but because she's a woman and has got intuition, is a little more tuned, she knows what you're thinking. And that perception is so subtle and it's not measurable that it's been denied by science as anything we're going to take a look at. And yet I think it may be a fundamental part of how we really understand the reality around us.
But in order to find answers to questions like that, don't we, in the end, have to trust our senses? Which one might question whether they can be trusted.
Well, there could be more than 5. There could be more than 6. There could be more senses that we don't know about.
Well, that's true, yeah.
I think there's a bunch of senses that are basically all that one sense. This ability to extract information from the quantum description of reality that he talks about. He's very, very deliberate in his speech about information extraction. And we have the means to understand information that we don't recognize as valid.
Mm-hmm. Right, okay.
So would you say that Plato's allegory of the cave is incorrect in this instance?
I would not be able to answer that question.
Oh, okay.
Well, there are a number of interpretations. Plato and his ideas about ideals, that somewhere, somewhen, there is an ideal of everything, and we only see a reflection of it. As if we were sitting in a cave and just saw a reflection of something rather than the real thing. A lot of Western thinking is based on that, but some of it perhaps can be salvaged, I think, philosophically. I don't know.
I guess, yeah. Well, it all depends on interpretation.
Yeah. But anyway, a lot of people think, Larry, that we are on the verge of a consciousness shift. Much has been made of the 2012 business in one form or another, and while some people believe the world will end, you name it, some people will believe it. There is a belief that we are in the an age where a consciousness shift for the positive will occur, perhaps because of the expansion or broadening of the kind you have mentioned, perhaps realizing more of our place in the universe or whatever. But what say you about that?
I think that to try to mix a couple of answers together, I think that what we've got here, first of all, that one of the problems is if you try to answer the problems about understanding the perception of the first sense, or the quantum hologram, inside the rubric of pure science, it's never been possible. There just wasn't a way to get to the answer doing enough math.
No.
So that was part of the problem right there. Second of all, I think maybe I'm creeping up on is the idea that the notion of a consensus reality is an oxymoron. That every one of us actually lives inside a small bubble of reality that is, in fact, the reality that we live in. And that our primary senses, bounded by that, keep us tightly coupled inside that little world. And people go off on tangents. They get really involved being a race car driver or whatever. And their world shrinks to knowing how to do that thing. When each one of us expands our ability to perceive outside of our private reality bubble and realizes that this person's reality is actually different than mine, but very, very similar enough so that we can feel like we're in the same room. That how many people are on the planet? 9 billion?
Too many. Yeah.
I think we just passed the 7 billion mark.
When 7 billion people each have an expansion of their own private consciousness to where they intermingle a little bit, and we realize how plastic reality can actually be, that might be the quote-unquote reality shift we're talking about. It's not like it's some big event that just happens and we watch it go on like the Super Bowl.
So you're going in the opposite direction that we are. Our philosophical conclusion from, again, albeit from paranormal work and just seeing where that's taken me over 42 years and then Ben now over 6 years, has been in the opposite direction more toward, unless I'm misunderstanding you, more toward human unity. And our conclusion philosophically is that the individual really doesn't exist. The individual is a unique expression of
everybody
else.
Yeah.
The whole unity. So, but you seem to have taken it in an opposite direction. Am I wrong?
Well, I'm not too sure, but we're pretty similar, but for some semantics.
Yes. They always get in the way, don't they?
I think that everybody lives inside a reality bubble of their own, and that the individual consciousness who thinks he's Larry Lowe having a phone conversation with Paul and Ben is but a focused subset of a larger consciousness field that happens to reside inside the quantum biocomputer of my brain, right? So yeah. I think I have an eye there to have.
Rather than just a sense of self-reference, as I'm having a senior moment. I can't remember the physicist who said it.
Fred Alan Wolf?
No, it wasn't Fred. It was his colleague. Anyway, Larry knows what I mean.
Yeah, okay. But the part of it is that there is a larger unified field of consciousness that you could give it a lot of interesting names, and I don't want to go too far there, but there's a unified field of consciousness, but that it coalesces into one mind and one point of view, and we get so wrapped up in being that person in that part of that reality that we think that is the reality. And where you're headed is that if we somehow grow and expand our ability to perceive a wider consciousness and realizes that we're all part of something, that we will unify.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a commercial break, and at the risk of giving headaches to those of you who are stuck in traffic in Providence and Boston, we'll continue with our conversation about consciousness. I think it's fascinating, and we'll be right back.
Curious about what's ahead for you in 2012? Guess. Or you can get a personalized astrological chart, setting you in the right direction, helping you to make those important decisions and choices. Fulfill your ambitions and achieve your goals. Move forward with confidence into the future this year, learning how to handle the new long-term planetary trends influencing your daily life. Money, health, job, your relationships, all included. Call me at 401-333-4048 for information on getting your chart or having a yearly update on a chart I've previously done for you. Put the spotlight on the future. Be a winner, not a worrier. Contrary to rumors you've been hearing about the world coming to an end in 2012, if it should, I'll give you a full refund. That's how sure I am it's not going to happen. I'm also available for private parties and speaking engagements. Call me 333-4048.
Okay, and we are back. I forgot to give the station ID. You are listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and ONWorldwide.com in New England's beautiful but snowless Blackstone River Valley. Okay, and I also wanted to mention Kindle Fire, the number one most wished-for product on Amazon. I guess you go on Amazon.com and you can put your wish list on there, because Kindle Fire is the number one wished-for item here, and it's only $1.99. You can get it's one gift, and you can get 1 million stories. You can get all sorts of books, magazines, apps, games, and all sorts of marvelous things on Amazon Kindle Fire. You can also get, of course, 4 of my books. Rhode Island, A Genial History, and of course on the paranormal topic, Faces at the Window, Footsteps in the Attic, Turning Home, God, Ghosts, and Human Destiny, and hopefully soon, Dancing Past the Graveyard, What Ghosts Have to Say About God. And I always tap our guests here. Any of your material on Amazon Kindle there, Larry?
Not yet.
Okay, well, we'll be waiting for it, because
work in progress.
Work in progress. Kindle Fire.
Work in progress.
And Amazon Kindle itself, of course, the Kindle device can be obtained for as low as $79 at Staples, many other places, Amazon.com. Check it out. We recommend it. It's a great gift at any time. Okay, welcome back, and we're going to continue our conversation with our good friend Larry Lowe, sort of one who is on the same journey we are, certainly, looking for what is behind the paranormal.
Hence the name of the show.
Well, yeah, that's why it's...
I know.
Right. Where have you been? Okay.
I was just trying to make a joke.
Okay.
Trying to lighten up the conversation a little bit.
Right.
So, Larry, I wanted to get your input on this conclusion I came up with today on the way to school. I was thinking, because there's so many teenagers out there that smoke weed, drop acid, stuff like that. Do you think that, or would you say that humans are naturally spiritual beings, but some people don't know how to attain that spiritual status in our society? So when they're teenagers, they mess around with narcotics and things like that to get to that state instead of doing it the right way and the clean way. And then when they're adults, they just get it beaten out of them by society, and then they consider it something bad and whatever, which I don't condone drug use. I'm just saying that maybe that spiritual experiences aren't considered healthy in this society.
Well, then there's like 3 questions in there.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to get
they're a little entangled, so let's try to sort of tease them out. I think the important one has to do is spiritual awareness, something that isn't taught or isn't understood or isn't accepted in the true sense. My conviction is that there is a fundamental ability to perceive spiritual class events, to put it the best way I can, that is sort of innate, but it is never trained, it's never nurtured. at one point the church was doing some things along that line, but the church has shifted completely out of really teaching any of those skills and simply trying to get you to behave in a fashion that lets them run their political power structure. And you're right. I think that a lot of young kids maybe wonder what else they could do with their mind besides simply consume media and enjoy experience. It's part of being young is that one of the best parts of being young is you get to try stuff out for the first time. The second question I would say is, I don't want to speak to the whole issue of drugs because it's very, very complicated, but I'll make this one comment. I believe that the DMT molecule, which is very, very closely akin to the endorphin molecule, it's already produced naturally in our brain, may be a mechanism to open up that perception, which Huxley was writing about, and the Doors named their band after, right? The Doors to Perception.
Oh yeah, that's true.
However, if you know anything about the process, set and setting are important. The respect you give the process is important. Who you have as a mentor or a shaman who will work you through setting you up, your intent going in is important. And DMT, Rick Strassman did some pretty amazing work here a while back by actually doing science on the incredibly difficult subjective perception of reality while under the influence of DMT, in fact. And what bothers me is I see on YouTube from time to time kids will get their hands on some DMT and take a massive hit. That'll blow their minds, and they'll start laughing uncontrollably, and then they will snap back out of it because it's a wrap it up, wrap it down thing. And then they think that putting a video of that on YouTube is the net result, and they are entirely missing the point of exploring the capabilities of their consciousness. And it's no wonder why various communities are busy saying, well, I think we probably need to make that illegal.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah. Well, one of my professors at one time, and I use it in my last book too, the term homoautorons, it is a natural, we are naturally constructed to, in the case of that term, worship, or at least to be aware of things beyond ourselves, much as in the sense of, we are sort of born to have the broader consciousness that we talk about. And when we don't have it, when we don't strive for it, maybe we don't know how to strive for it, in a society based, as you say, on materialist, in the box of materialism.
Yeah, things start to fall apart. We don't know who we are. And I know a lot of Ben's friends. They're the greatest people in the world. And I prefer to spend time with them than I do with most grown-ups. And, of course, we live in a society where, as I say, people don't generally get any emotionally older than 12. And they just sort of get more and more lost because we insist on our own way, which is this box, as you say. That's the way I see it anyhow. So, I don't know. What do you have any further comment on that before we go on? Because
I think our media and our educational system are responsible for keeping us there. And
I agree with that.
It goes back to a long diatribe I could give you about the Robertson Commission and the management of media perception in the country. And we're only, I know a lot of very, very smart, very ill-informed people who have never read the evidence, won't look through the telescope, don't want to hear about the flying saucers, and simply tell me the whole thing is bad astronomy. And they are smug and they're proud because they know good astronomy when they see it, and they'll write a blog about bad astronomy because if you think this other thing could be going on, you're a bad astronomer. And I think the problem is that they are limited by their own thought process in the reality that they can experience.
Yes,
and I'd like to talk to you. I'd like to ask you guys a little bit. Turn the tables here.
No, yeah, we allowed some time for that too. But before you do, there is the number one ingredient, in my opinion, for knowing anything in any sort of honest way, whether you have a PhD or whether you're just a truck driver. And I've known several truck drivers who are brilliant people, but they use every bit of their time for reading. And that first ingredient is the H word, humility. You don't often hear that today. But I think that is the number one ingredient for honesty, in intellectually or any other way, is humility. Okay, so go ahead and ask away.
Well, I got to back up and say that's a very good point. I've never heard anybody express it that way, but you're really right. You have to have kind of an honest curiosity and a kind of a sense that you don't know. And I think that to a certain degree, and let's not knock technology, because as I point out in the article, understanding electromagnetics put the computers inside the thing that understanding Newton's laws of motion got Edgar Mitchell to the moon and back.
Yeah.
So technology has done us a fair amount of good, but when you get trapped inside the belief that that's all there is, and you can't assume there is anything else, I'm not too sure. But what you don't end up living in the reality that you think you're living in, and these things simply don't go on in your reality.
Yeah. Well, anything that's out of balance can become negative.
Well, I wanted to ask you guys about your perception of different individuals that you've worked with over time who can have this level of perception of some form of other intelligence, whether you want to call it a ghost or an alien or whatever. Can you get a sense of which people have the ability to perceive and which ones don't?
Yeah, I don't. Do you want to start, Ben? No.
Well, that we perceive them and they perceive us back, or that we perceive them, they don't perceive us. Sorry, I was kind of confused as to the way the question was phrased.
Well, actually, that's two good questions. I want to ask later on about the fact they perceive you, but I'm just starting with the human side of the equation.
Ah, okay.
I'm not too sure, but some humans have an ability to understand certain things and perceive them, and others just don't have it. It could be going on, but it isn't perceived in person B. So he says, "I'm sorry, that's bad astronomy. It ain't happening."
Yeah. Well, this has come up very often, if I may, Ben.
I was going to quote Beetlejuice, but you can. You can.
Well, no, I think I have a sense of what Larry might be starting to get at here. This has come up very often in the context of people asking us how to tell a good psychic from a bad psychic.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And this comes up all the time. We're not really into that aspect of it. We approach the paranormal from a different level, really. But the ordinary person does run into the paranormal in the form of psychics and mediums very often because it's all over the media. My first bit of advice to them is if you perceive that these people are egotistical, hey, this is the whole humility thing, then I would have some doubts. I think that when one does not sort of empty oneself, I suppose in a spiritual sense, then one cannot honestly fill oneself with a broader consciousness. I think that ego is false and gets in the way of truth. So when one if one can accomplish the monumental task in such a self-centered society of obtaining some sort of humility, then that's the beginning of true consciousness. And so that's the advice that I would give to people, and it's certainly one of the expressions of whether this person is humble or not is how much love you perceive from them. In the case of a psychic, we've had people on this show who are just so full of brilliant minds, but full of themselves to the point where they can't see beyond their own noses. And other people who have been ordinary folks who've experienced extraordinary events, who are just so humbled by them that they are lessons for us in our own lives. I mean, that's the best way I can put it. Ben?
Well, I feel like everybody can perceive if they really, really want to, but to quote Beetlejuice, if everyone who's listening has seen Beetlejuice, one of the rules that most ghosts follow, quote unquote, is humans don't see you because they don't want to see you. So, in my opinion, I feel like people just don't want to see things that are out of their little boxes, as they say. They're out of their little realms of perception, because then that would just totally screw everything up, because the thing that probably would scare us the most besides boredom is knowing that we don't have control over things. Which is one thing some people must understand, is that we have absolutely no control over anything.
That's essentially what we learned in intelligence training was, be where you're not expected to be. You are the wind in the grass.
See.
And that's the secret of I suppose, invisibility or semi-invisibility in that context. So, I don't know if that answers your question, Larry.
No, that's very good.
All right, but I think you might be getting it too at entities we run into in the course of our paranormal work as well. As I explained we had a show recently. I guess what was it, last week? Yeah, we did on the photographs of Jerry Warner. And when Jerry didn't know Jerry from Adam, he sent these photographs to us. I don't know if you've seen them on our website or not, but we're on his. There was one entity in particular which has very clearly the sort of almost the body of a horse or a giraffe with a longish neck, and the face of a lion or a cat. And I said, I know this creature, not personally, but this species has been one we have run into in the course of our paranormal work, because we don't look at ghosts as spirits of the dead. We don't look at what we consider a very narrow view of the paranormal. We look at this as literally a cosmic journey through many kinds of parallel worlds. And when you look at it that way, I like to think that our consciousness has expanded because of taking down the barriers and limitations of human knowledge and tradition and the materialistic world, and interpreting these things and experiencing them far beyond what most quote-unquote ghost hunters would, or other investigators. And the result has been a remarkable interaction with many different kinds of creatures. And when we went on Coast to Coast last May and talked about this, I was very reluctant to do so, because as I said then, I've spent 40 years or more trying to build up a reputation as a journalist with feet on the ground, as you have, Larry, with feet on the ground, and one who was not given to any sorts of flights of fancy. And Ben has his own story. He's a different kind of guy. But he himself has had experiences of these kinds in his own way. And I don't know, there comes a point where maybe it's my age, there comes a point where you just have to stop questioning and accept it, because the questions don't mean anything anymore. I don't know if that's what you need, but
I think that there's a couple of parallels there. One of those is J. Allen Hynek, that classic example, got hired as an astronomer at Northwestern, and said, okay, you know what, I can tell you which one's Venus and which one's the weather balloon. And at the end of his career, there was just too much evidence that there was something going on that was a phenomenon that had to be addressed.
Exactly, yeah.
And more time and time again, you see somebody going in with the best, as I did, with the best of left brain, scientific, inside your box of context framework. I was a pilot. I know physics. I'm an engineer. I'm trying to keep. I want an understanding I can put my hands on.
Mm-hmm.
And if you pursue this phenomenon long enough, openly enough, and expose yourself to enough things, pretty soon you say to yourself, you know what, there's something going on here that nobody taught me could even happen. And now that I've seen enough, and it starts subtle, these things start very subtle, and over time, and the more you understand they're going on, the more they tend to do go on, which is what tells me that there's a perceptual filter inside our brains that filters these things out. And that goes back to the comment, people don't see ghosts because they don't want to see them. It might also be that people don't see ghosts because they don't believe they can see them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that subtle shift of saying, I'm going to look for them. And that's a very slippery slope, because then you can very rapidly, and I've seen a lot of people in this community do it, go down this field of sort of a self-delusion, and the next thing you know, they've lost all discernment, and they're telling me with a straight face stuff that I know is completely bogus because they've lost it. So there's two sides to this issue. You have to have that leap of faith, and it is a big one, that there's something out there that can affect my perception, that I could learn to perceive, that I was never taught about. But at the same time, not everything you hear about is so. There's a lot of confabulation and confusion. It's very, very difficult to sort stuff out early on.
That's true, yeah.
And not everybody out there that entities that come and try to communicate with you are who they say they are.
Absolutely
or what they say
right.
They are.
Absolutely, and that is a critical point of understanding. Now, I'm going to. This is a little late. I'm going to just take a bit of a pause here to give you our telephone number. We always get so involved in the conversations with our marvelous guests, such as Larry, that I forget to give you the darn telephone number because we do take calls. Anyway, for what it's worth, we have a couple of minutes left, and it's locally 401-766-1240 in the local listening area, and also nationally, anywhere in the United States, 800-449-1240. So, in any case, sorry about that. We have to try to discipline ourselves to give that number a little sooner.
It's okay.
Anyway, no, but I see certainly what Larry is saying here. There are a number of ultimate questions involved in this entire issue. People seem to be experiencing more and more phenomena. Sometimes I think, well, maybe it's because, we're a little bit better known so now than we used to be, so people maybe call and tell us more. But everyone we talk to is saying not everyone, but, many, many people are talking about the increase in apparent paranormal phenomena. We have certain interpretation of why that is occurring. We talked about the earth sounds when you were on with Linda Moulton Howe with us, Larry, on CBS a week ago. And you name it, it's sort of starting to happen. And there are a lot of sort of inexplicable or semi-inexplicable phenomena, or at least for which explanations have not yet been found, that seem to be going on. Do you think this is part of any kind of consciousness shift, that more people are embracing broader senses of consciousness?
I keep coming back to the model that you have a perceptual center in your mind that is your visual cortex or your auditory cortex that delivers the reality to whatever it is that's doing the perceiving itself, right? Your visual cortex gives you your sense of sight. And there's these barriers up here to that subtle influx from what Mitchell refers to as the quantum hologram. And they've been there for a long time, and they seem to be coming down. Maybe people are getting better educated. Maybe people are talking to one another at the water cooler. Maybe there's some sort of force actually going on. But as this internal mental filter changes its effect, people seem to be perceiving more things.
Do you believe? I don't know if that's the right question. What is the quantum hologram? Just for those who don't understand it.
Well, I think I'd like to take just a moment and speak to that because that's exactly what is important.
Okay.
That he's doing. The Holy Grail of physics is the unified field theory. And there's a whole big long dissertation about how we get to trying to put the math together to get the electroweak force, the strong magnetic force, and gravitation all in one equation. And that has been the purview of science ever since we started doing anything like it. Now, mercifully short, when Mitchell came back and started looking for what causes this fundamental sense of unified total cosmic awareness, he ended up reading the work of a fellow by the name of Walter Schempp. And Schempp imagined a hologram projected with a thing called the black body radiation. Now, I'm going to quote from my own article. Black body radiation, which Mitchell explains, is a property of every physical object, has photon emissions that are non-local, quantum entangled, and carry information about the emitting object that can be recovered and used by perceptive minds. And that last one is important. Those minds have got to be perceptive. Now, the result would be something akin to the Force in Star Wars. It would be similar to what the Akashic Record was. It would explain Rupert Sheldrake's notion of morphic resonance. It's this unified awareness of everything without it being there. And if it's non-local across space and conceivably non-local across time, then we live in a far more wondrous reality than many of us have imagined is possible to perceive. And because we don't imagine we can perceive it, we don't perceive it. And if that ability to perceive is slowly changing because of people's attitudes, perhaps their perceptions are changing, and perhaps they're opening up to this reality.
Well, that's the perfect answer to the question, because that certainly seems to be the case. We often will almost with trepidation, give, I suppose you might call spiritual advice to people who ask, and many people have begun to, again, it's semantics, but we believe, and of course the subconscious mind is containing many different lives that we're living simultaneously elsewhere and elsewhen, and that's the nature of our subconscious. And people have the danger of that, of course, is if you embrace those other lives, to put it in our terms, you can end up, schizophrenic or diagnosed as such anyway. And we've discussed that many times. But there are others who approach it more with feet on the ground and properly, as we say, and they get great benefit from being in touch with these other consciousnesses, which is really part of the same consciousness, I guess, and hence our ideas about unity. But in any case, I suppose we are saying the same thing in many, many different ways. Larry, we're down to our last few minutes here. Why don't you tell us what you're working on, tell us where people can find out more about you, your website, etc.
Well, I've just started a new role at the Examiner called the Social Reality Examiner, and I'm going to start to try to explore the disconnect between the media-driven version of what's going on and what may be going on, because it goes way beyond just the paranormal thing. We're not getting a good picture of the world from our media.
No. That's true. Well, we always we talk a lot off the air, the three of us, and we will continue to do so.
Yes.
Examining these very questions, and we will be discussing possibly an on-air panel in maybe a little less than a year. We'll see what happens. But anyway, Larry, we thank you very much. You're a good friend and an articulate spokesman for many, many important ideas, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
It's been a delight, Paul. Thank you, Ben.
You're welcome.
Okay. Larry Lowe, everyone. Renaissance man. Okay. We wanted to remind you, of course, that you can contact us and get information on guests, past and future, and shows, subjects, etc., and well over 300, we're coming up on almost 400 podcasts now, behindtheparanormal.com. Check that out for us. And also you can contact us through links on that site as well. Ben, of course, being Ben at behindtheparanormal.com, and me, Paul, at behindtheparanormal.com. You can contact either of us. Also, you can buy my books on that site. That would be helpful, since we don't make a lot of money at this.
Now is a good time to mention what you were talking about earlier.
Yes, exactly. Bay State Children's Hospital, everyone. You may not live in Massachusetts or in this area here, but it's really, really important. Our little cousin, Libby, who has been the subject of several videos about this, and is a 12-year-old cancer survivor, has been helped tremendously, and her family, by the Bay State Children's Hospital. You want to check it out, baystatehealth.org, baystatehealth.org. They are in the Springfield, Mass. area, and again, just check them out. They are very special, and they need some upgrades of, I know, some furniture in the areas where they help the families, where they're waiting for the children to be treated, etc. And they do help the families as well as the children. So check it out, and you'll also be helping our little cousin too, Libby, and she's a wonderful, wonderful kid. Lib Strong is the name that we have for her and the family, and you can check her out on Facebook. So that would be something we'd really appreciate.
Okay, so we have well over 300 free podcasts on our show website, and that is www.behindtheparanormal.com.
And I want to thank Ben tonight. Did a fine job as our producer again. He's been running the board during our shows. And we will see you next Monday, March 5th, right here on WOON 1240 AM and ONWorldwide.com, when Ben and I will host an open line show and get back into that endless stack of calls and emails on all subjects paranormal.
And on our regular CBS edition on CBS, New Sky Radio, March 4th in Boston, Pittsburgh, Detroit, and Seattle, we'll host the first of two roundtable discussions that will go deeper into the 1980 Rendlesham Forest UFO case, and our guests will be Peter Robbins and eyewitness Larry Warren.
Yeah, we'll do 2 weeks on that because the conference is coming. We'll leave you this evening with a quote from the great American statesman Adlai Stevenson. If we value the pursuit of knowledge, we must be free to follow wherever that search may lead us. The free mind is no barking dog to be tethered on a 10-foot chain, unquote.
And thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we will see you next time.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.